Most people who got into Invincible through the show think they've seen what the story is, but the show has covered maybe a third of it. The comics ran for 144 issues across 15 years and went places most superhero stories never dare to go. I went through all of it, every arc, every death, every moment that changes who Mark Grayson is by the end. This is Invincible's entire story explained, from issue 1 so the way to the final page. Spoiler warning for everything. We're going all the way. Mark Grayson is 17 when his powers come in. His dad is Nolan Grayson, known to the world as Omni-Man, the most powerful superhero on the planet. Nolan told Mark growing up that Viltrumites were a benevolent race who traveled the universe helping civilizations develop. So when Mark's strength and flight kick in, the story he has is a good one. His father is a hero. Mark is going to be a hero. Everything makes sense. He takes the name Invincible and starts working as a superhero, fighting the kinds of threats that feel manageable at 17. The Mahler twins, a couple of cloning geniuses who keep causing problems, a physics teacher turning his students into human bombs. He teams up with the Teen Team, a group of young heroes including Robot, Rexplode, Duplicate, and Adam Eve. He's figuring out the basics, how to fight properly, how to fly without wrecking buildings, how to balance a part-time job in high school with punching things hard enough to shatter concrete. What the series does beautifully in these early issues is make you feel how exciting this is for Mark. He's not conflicted about his powers, he's not brooding. He's a teenager who just got the thing he always wanted and whose dad is there to mentor him through it. The world feels full of possibility. Adam Eve is interesting to him in a way he hasn't figured out yet. Robot is mysterious and clearly smarter than everyone. Rexplode is competitive and annoying and someone Mark can measure himself against. It's fun. The series is genuinely fun in a way that makes what comes next hit so much harder. His dad trains him, takes him on a mission to a distant planet, shows him what a Viltrumite can do in open space against opponents who aren't holding back. Nolan is proud of Mark. That pride is real. You can feel it in the way they interact. The whole setup is designed to make you believe in this version of the story because the series needs you to believe in it before it destroys it. And then Nolan kills the Guardians of the Globe. All of them, the most powerful heroes on the planet. In secret, alone, Omni-Man murders every member of the team he'd served alongside for years. The series doesn't show you this happening. It just shows the aftermath, the blood, the bodies, and then moves on while Mark keeps going about his life, completely unaware that his father is now the world's most dangerous secret. The truth about Nolan comes out in issue 11, and it's one of the most significant single issues in comics history for what it does to the reader's understanding of everything that came before. Nolan didn't come to Earth to protect it, he came to conquer it. The Viltrumites aren't a benevolent space civilization. They're an empire of conquerors who subjugate planets, reduce their populations through violence, and install Viltrumite rule. Nolan spent years on Earth waiting for Mark to develop powers so his son could help him take over. The whole life Mark thought he had, the mentor, the hero father, the origin story, was a cover for a mission of planetary conquest. Every memory Mark has of his father is now poisoned. The training wasn't fatherly pride, the guidance wasn't genuine, the warmth that felt real between them might not have been real at all. Mark doesn't know which parts of his childhood were true and which were performance, and neither do you as a reader because the story never makes it fully clean. When Mark confronts him, Nolan beats him nearly to death, and I mean that literally. Mark gets beaten across the country, through mountains, into the ground, over and over. Nolan breaks his son's bones, ruptures his organs, and delivers a monologue about how humans are insignificant and how long he's been waiting for Mark to understand what they really are. It's one of the most brutal extended sequences in superhero comics, specifically because one of these two people clearly loves the other, and the violence is coming from that tension rather than from hatred. Mark keeps getting up. That's not because he can win. He can't. He keeps getting up because it's his dad. The visual of Mark repeatedly rising from craters while his father waits with something that looks like disappointment is the image the series is built around, and then Nolan leaves. He just flies away into space, unable to finish it. He couldn't kill his son. Like whatever the mission required, he couldn't do it when the moment came. He leaves and doesn't come back for a long time. Mark recovers from injuries that should have ended him. His mother finds out the truth about her husband and has to rebuild her entire understanding of her own life. Mark has to rebuild everything he thought he knew, not just about his father, but about himself, about what Viltrumite genetics mean for who he is, about whether he's going to become something like what Nolan almost was. That question never fully goes away. The series spends the next 100+ issues asking it in different forms. This is the series' defining moment, and it happens before the 20th issue. After Nolan leaves, Mark gets connected to the Global Defense Agency and its director, Cecil Stedman. Cecil is one of the most layered characters in the entire run. He wants to protect the Earth, but his methods include things that would horrify most people. Using villains Mark defeated as forced contractors for the GDA, building armies of reanimated corpses, keeping secrets from the heroes he works with because he decides they can't handle the full picture. He's not evil, he's someone who made a decision years ago that protecting humanity is the only thing that matters and has been following that logic ever since, regardless of where it leads. His relationship with Mark is one of the most interesting recurring tensions in the series. Like, Mark needs Cecil's resources and connections. He disagrees with almost everything Cecil does beyond the most basic mission. They break from each other, come back, break again. Cecil is one of the few characters who treats Mark like an asset to be managed rather than a person to be respected, and Mark keeps coming back anyway because Cecil is effective and the world is dangerous. Meanwhile, Robot, who led the teen team, is given the task of rebuilding the Guardians of the Globe. He recruits a new roster: Duplicate, Monster Girl, Black Samson, Rexplode, Shrinking Ray, and starts becoming something more than just a tech genius in a suit. His arc across the whole series is one of the great slow burns. Every time you think you understand what Robot is, the next development reframes everything you thought you knew. He's building towards something, and the series lets that build for years before showing you what it is. Mark's personal life keeps developing alongside the superhero work. He and Adam Eve have complicated feelings for each other that don't resolve cleanly at first. He's in a relationship with Amber, a girl from school who deserves better than what dating a superhero actually involves. Oliver shows up, Nolan's son from a relationship with a Thraxan woman during his years of space travel. Oliver's half Viltrumite, half Thraxan, and Thraxans age at a dramatically accelerated rate compared to humans. He goes from infant to teenager in just a few years. His emotional development and his physical capabilities are completely out of sync in ways that make him difficult to parent or mentor. He's a kid with a teenager's body and a fighter's instincts who never got to be young properly. Angstrom Levy enters the picture in this period. He's a scientist with the ability to open portals to alternate dimensions, and he was trying to merge the knowledge of all his alternate selves when Mark inadvertently caused the machine to explode. Angstrom survived, badly disfigured, with thousands of alternate minds crammed into his skull. He blames Mark. What makes Angstrom interesting as a villain is that the anger is understandable. Mark was there. Mark's intervention made things worse. The fact that Mark didn't intend the outcome doesn't make Angstrom's disfigurement and madness less real. He keeps coming back throughout the series, each time worse and harder to deal with, traveling between dimensions to heal and build new plans. He's one of the few villains who makes Mark question himself every time they fight. Nolan comes back. He'd been captured by alien forces and held as a political prisoner before Alan the alien found him and got him out. Alan has been a background figure since near the beginning. He's an Unapan bred specifically to be strong enough to defeat a Viltrumite, and he operates as an evaluator for the Coalition of Planets, checking planets for champions capable of resisting Viltrumite invasion. His power scales through near-death experience. Every time he almost dies, he comes back measurably stronger. That mechanism becomes crucial later. Nolan being back is complicated in every direction. He loves Mark, he loved Debbie, even if that relationship is now destroyed. The mission he came to Earth to complete and the life he actually built here are both real and both irreconcilable. He has Mark, he has Oliver, he has to face what he did to the Guardians, and he does face it in the way someone faces something they can't undo. With guilt they carry rather than consequences they actually pay in proportion to what they did. The series is honest about this. Nolan gets a kind of redemption arc that some readers feel he earned and others feel he never deserved. He starts working with the Coalition of Planets, which is the interstellar resistance organization founded by Thetis, a Viltrumite who turned against his own empire thousands of years ago and spent centuries organizing opposition. Through Nolan and Alan, Mark gets the full picture of what the Viltrumite empire actually is. The Scourge virus nearly wiped them out. Fewer than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites survived. The Empire's apparent strength has been a performance for decades, a bluff maintained because showing weakness would invite the Coalition to finish the job. But a few dozen Viltrumites is still a few dozen beings who can punch through planets and survive almost anything. The math is terrifying from every angle. The Invincible War happens in this period. Angstrom Levy, having built up his capabilities across multiple dimensions and spent years nursing his rage against Mark, imports an army of evil Invincibles from alternate universes, versions of Mark who made different choices, who sided with Nolan, who became exactly exactly what Viltrumite genetics could produce if the human side lost. These alternate marks tear through Earth's heroes in one of the most devastating single-issue attacks in the series. Every major hero gets hurt. The damage to cities is catastrophic. Mark eventually beats them, Angstrom's evil Invincibles eventually turn on Angstrom himself, and the whole operation collapses. But the aftermath leaves the hero community deeply suspicious of Mark. If every alternate version of him eventually goes bad, what does that say about this one? That suspicion is one of the things the series keeps honest about. Mark has to live with the knowledge that in most versions of his story, he became something terrible. The fact that he hasn't yet doesn't mean he won't. The series never fully resolves that tension. It just shows Mark making one choice after another that pushes back against the trajectory his genetics suggest. The uncertainty is the point. Cecil, in the aftermath of the Invincible War, reveals some of what he's been doing that Mark didn't know about. He's been using villains Mark defeated as contractors. He has D.A. Sinclair working for him. Sinclair is the scientist who first created Reanimen, essentially reanimated corpses wired as soldiers. He has secrets stacked on secrets and has been making calls Mark would never sanction because he decided he had to. Mark quits working for Cecil. They stay in each other's orbits anyway because the world requires it. Their relationship is one of the best things in the series specifically because neither of them is wrong about everything and neither of them is right about everything, and they both know it. Conquest is the moment the series escalates past everything that came before. He's a Viltrumite sent to finish what Nolan failed to start. Old, experienced, with one eye replaced by a mechanical prosthetic from injuries sustained across centuries of warfare. He doesn't fight the way younger Viltrumites do. He's patient, calculating, and he's been doing this for hundreds of years. He fights Mark twice. The first fight nearly kills Mark in ways the series hasn't managed yet. Eve and Oliver both try to help. Eve gets critically injured, Oliver gets badly hurt. Mark wins only barely, being so comprehensively that his recovery takes months. The series treats this aftermath seriously. Mark isn't bouncing back immediately with inspirational music. He's broken, scared, and questioning whether he can do this at all. The second fight is worse. By this point, Mark has developed substantially. He's stronger, faster, and more experienced than the kid who barely survived the first encounter. He's also spent months thinking about Conquest and dreading the rematch. The second fight still nearly ends him. This time, Eve actually dies. Her heart stops from injuries she took trying to help Mark. She revives herself by using her power to reconstruct her own biology. Her ability to manipulate matter extends to her own body, but the series commits to the death long enough that you believe it. It's one of the bravest things the series does. Killing Eve, even temporarily, breaks something in the story that can't be fixed. Consequences feel permanently real after that moment. Mark kills Conquest by strangling him to death. It takes everything he has. It's the first time he deliberately ends someone who was genuinely trying to kill him, and Kirkman refuses to let it feel clean. Mark survives. Conquest is dead. Neither of those facts feels like a victory. The series is starting to make a distinction between winning a fight and being okay. And that distinction never goes away. The war the whole first half of the series was building toward. Mark, Nolan, Oliver, Alan, Battle Beast, Tech Jacket, and Space Racer form the strike force that takes the fight directly to the Viltrumites, not defending Earth, going to them. The scale shifts from superhero fights to actual interstellar warfare, and the series handles the transition well. The fights feel bigger, the stakes feel different, and the bodies that fall feel permanent. They fight through Viltrumite-controlled space and eventually reach the planet Viltrum itself. The planet's destruction is achieved through a devastating coordinated run. Mark, Nolan, Space Racer, and Thetis flying through Viltrum at full speed and cracking it apart. The Viltrumites' homeworld, thousands of years of history and architecture, shattered in space. Thrag's response is immediate and awful. He decapitates Thetis right there in front of everyone as the planet breaks apart around them, and this is the first time we see what Thrag actually is at full force. Mark lands a punch on him. Thrag gets a nosebleed. That's it. Nolan intervenes. Thrag impales Nolan and nearly kills Oliver in the same exchange. He's handling multiple Viltrumite level threats simultaneously like it's a minor inconvenience. The gap between Thrag and everything else is staggering, and the series puts it on the page immediately. He lets Mark and Nolan go. He needs Viltrumite numbers, and two half-bloods are still Viltrumites. Killing them here would be wasteful. That calculation is more frightening than anything else he could do. The war ends not in victory, but in a negotiated settlement that leaves everyone uncomfortable. Thrag comes to Earth with the remaining Viltrumites and presents Mark and Nolan with terms. Viltrumites live among humans and breed to rebuild their population. No open conquest, no conflict with the coalition, just time and numbers. The implicit threat underneath the deal is that refusing means every human on Earth dies. Mark and Nolan accept. Mark comes home to find out Eve had an abortion while he was gone. She couldn't raise a child alone while he was off fighting an interstellar war with no guarantee he was coming back. She made the decision she had to make. He doesn't blame her. He holds her while she cries. It's the quietest and most devastating moment in the entire run. Post-war Mark is different. He's more willing to accept that some things require hard choices. He's less certain that the clean, heroic answer is always the right one. He's watched the Viltrumite War end not in victory, but in a compromise that lets a handful of planet crushers live on Earth indefinitely. He killed Conquest. He watched Eve die and come back. He came home to find out the woman he loves had to make a devastating choice alone because he wasn't there. Pure heroism, the simple, clear version he started with, is harder to believe in. This is what makes him vulnerable to Dinosaurus. Dinosaurus is a scientist named David Anders with a split personality that takes over when he becomes emotionally indifferent. The Dinosaurus personality is a utilitarian extremist, a being who believes that mass casualties now prevent worse catastrophes later and has the intelligence to build detailed statistical models proving it. He destroys Las Vegas with hydrogen bombs. Thousands of people die instantly. The ruins of the city are eventually converted into one of the largest solar power installations in the world, providing clean energy to millions. Dinosaurus' math, as disturbing as it is, actually works out. Mark sees the solar panels and makes the worst decision of his career. He looks at what Dinosaurus achieved and decides that the results justify the approach, that partnering with someone who thinks at that scale might do more good than anything conventional heroism can accomplish. He breaks Dinosaurus out of the Pentagon and they start working together. It ends with over 1 million people dead. Dinosaurus triggers the San Andreas fault line, causing massive earthquakes across multiple cities. Then he floods coastal areas across the world. He was working toward long-term environmental stabilization that he believed would save billions eventually. Over 1 million people died who were alive the day before. Cecil declares Mark an enemy of the state. Mark kills Dinosaurus himself at Dinosaurus' request. Dinosaurus understands that the cycle will repeat if he lives. His personality will drift back to this kind of thinking no matter how many times someone tries to rehabilitate him. He asks Mark to end it. Mark does. He trusted a brilliant, genuine utilitarian extremist because he was tired of feeling like conventional heroism wasn't enough. The lesson isn't that big thinking is wrong. It's that Mark delegated his moral judgment to someone else, and 1 million people paid for it. That lesson sits with him for the rest of the series. Robot's arc across the whole series has been a slow revelation that the series plants early and pays off late. The setup: Robot, real name Rudolph Connors, is a human whose body is deformed beyond functional use. He operates a robotic suit remotely while his actual body sits in a containment tube. He's been doing this for his entire life. What he eventually does is transfer his brain into a cloned human body. A clone of Rexplode, because Rex has the kind of physical presence Rudy never did. This creates a strange, uncomfortable dynamic with the Guardians. Robot in a human body with Rex's face while Rex is still alive and dating Monster Girl. The whole situation is deeply weird, and the series just lets it be weird without resolving the discomfort. Robot and Monster Girl get sent to the Flaxen dimension, a place where time moves faster than in baseline reality. What's a brief absence from Earth's perspective is nearly 1,000 years from theirs. They live an entire lifetime in the Flaxen dimension, governing it, fighting wars, building systems. When they come back, Robot has spent a millennium thinking about Earth's problems and how to solve them at a scale that conventional heroism never manages. When he makes his move, it's devastating because it's been carefully planned for a long time. He kills Cecil first because Cecil had the resources and the intelligence network to potentially stop him. Then Rexplode. Black Samson, anyone who poses a direct threat to his ability to consolidate control. He cuts off Eve's leg while she's pregnant, specifically to stop her from being able to fight back. He traps Mark in an alternate dimension using Angstrom Levy's technology, buying the time he needs to establish the infrastructure before Mark can return, and then he presents the world with a utopia. Real peace, resources, distributed efficiently, diseases being eliminated, conflicts managed through his drone armies. He builds something measurably better than what was there before. People are healthier and safer under robots' rule than they were under the old system. This is what makes his arc interesting rather than just another villain takeover. He achieved results. The world is objectively improved. The problem is what it costs to get there and what keeping it requires. Like, Cecil didn't have to die for the solar panels to work. Rex didn't have to die for the hospitals to run. The logic that killing threats to the system is acceptable doesn't have a natural stopping point. It just expands to include whoever currently poses the biggest obstacle. Mark comes back. The fight against robots' drones is brutal and goes badly for Mark and Eve. Mark eventually reaches the conclusion that he can't destroy what Robot builds. Too many people's lives depend on the infrastructure he created, but he absolutely cannot let Robot keep running it. He leaves Earth in Robot's control temporarily while he handles remaining cosmic threats. The compromise satisfies nobody. The series knows it satisfies nobody. That's the point. What Robot's arc ultimately adds to the series is a second answer to the question of what power is for. Mark's answer is to use it in service of the people around you and accept the cost of getting it wrong. Robot's answer is to use it to optimize the system regardless of the human cost of doing so. The series doesn't pretend Robot's answer produces bad outcomes in the short term. It doesn't. It just shows that the logic has no stopping point and that a world run by someone who's made that calculation isn't a world anyone actually wants to live in. Even if the infrastructure is excellent, Mark leaves Earth and falls into a dimensional rift that spits him out 5 years later. From his perspective, it's disorienting and brief. From everyone else's perspective, he just disappeared at one of the worst possible times. Eve gave birth to their daughter, Tara. She raised her alone for 5 years with no idea if Mark was alive or coming back, but she built a life. She moved to Telescria with the Coalition for a while. She eventually started a relationship with another man. When Mark gets back, Tara is a child who calls someone else dad. Eve has rebuilt herself, and the relationship between her and Mark has to be rebuilt too, from a different starting point with everything the 5 years cost them sitting between them. The series doesn't rush past this. The emotional reality of what the gap costs their relationship gets real attention, and the weight of Tara not knowing her father is the most specific and concrete consequence of what being a superhero with cosmic responsibilities actually means in practice. Mark always has something more important than the people he loves that needs his attention. The series never lets him forget what that costs them. While Mark was gone, Thrag was working. Thousands of Thraxan Viltrumite hybrids growing rapidly on Thraxa, his twins Onaan and Ursal leading the army he was building, territory being seized, the hybrid children inheriting Viltrumite strength, and the Thraxan rapid aging that meant they were combat ready fast. Thrag had turned the exile into a production operation. Oliver, Mark's half-brother, went undercover inside Thrag's army at Alan's direction. He spent years doing this, gathering intelligence, undermining operations from the inside, trying to be useful in the only way the situation allowed. Thrag eventually found him. Thrag fatally impaled him. Oliver died protecting Mark's daughter Tara from Thrag's attack. Oliver's death is one of the hardest moments in the final arc. He was never really given a chance to be young. He grew up too fast. Mark took on too much and died doing exactly what he'd been shaped his whole life to do, sacrificing himself for the mission. Mark standing over his brother's body and then having to go back to fighting is the series at its most honest about what the life costs. The last major conflict pulls everyone together in a way the series has been building towards since Thrag first appeared. Mark convinces Nolan to bring the loyal Viltrumites into the fight alongside the Coalition. The combined force pushed back against his hybrid army across the territory he'd seized. Coalition fighters, loyal Viltrumites, Earth's heroes, everyone who had a reason to stop Thrag. Thrag's children fight with the ferocity of beings who were literally born and trained for war. Many of them die. Some of them, including Ursal, all might start to realize their father sees them as weapons rather than people. That crack in Thrag's command structure matters for how the ending goes. Nolan fights Thrag directly in the final battle. They've been building toward this confrontation for the whole series. Thrag the conqueror who maintained the empire, Nolan the exile who turned against everything Viltrum stood for and found something worth loving instead. Thrag kills him. He headbutts Nolan's hand hard enough to break it, then drives his arm through Nolan's body and tears his heart out. Nolan Grayson dies. The weight of that death is enormous in context. Nolan spent centuries as an instrument of an empire that deserved to end. Then he spent years trying, imperfectly and with all his flaws on display, to be a father and a husband and eventually a leader worth following. Yet he and Debbie reconciled. He and Mark found something real after the horror of what he'd done. His death here protecting that that reconciled version of himself while fighting the thing he used to be, closes that arc. Mark takes Thrag into the sun. The star burns through them both. Thrag breaks Mark's arms in the core. Robot's remote suit finds Mark mid-fight. One of his armors reached Mark in the worst possible moment and provided a few seconds of thermal protection. In that window, with his arms broken and his body barely holding together, Mark bites through Thrag's throat. Alan pulls Mark out of the sun afterward. Mark was ready to die there. The victory required everything going right, and Mark being willing to accept that it might not. Thrag's body stays in the star. The liberation of Earth from Robot's control follows. Robot is defeated and imprisoned, his brain kept alive in a container, serving as an advisor to the Immortal who takes on governing the Earth in Robot's absence. It's another compromise in a series full of compromises. Robot's knowledge is too valuable to destroy. His freedom is too dangerous to allow. He exists in a kind of permanent accountability that the series treats as appropriate given everything he did to get there. With Thrag dead and Nolan gone, Mark is the legitimate heir of Emperor Argal. He becomes Emperor of the Viltrumite. The species that spent thousands of years conquering the universe is now led by a half-human kid from Earth who grew up believing his father was a hero and spent his whole career trying to be one, despite everything that heritage meant. The tension at the center of this resolution is what makes it interesting. Mark doesn't lead the Viltrumites into more conquest because Mark fundamentally doesn't believe in conquest. He steers the Empire towards something that looks less like an empire by the time it's done. A force that goes to worlds the way Nolan once told Mark Viltrumites were supposed to go to worlds, actually helping rather than subjugating. The lie Nolan told him about what Viltrumites were eventually becomes the truth that Mark makes real. The series takes that transformation seriously rather than just asserting it. Then we see the resistance within the Viltrumites themselves. Not all of them want this. Some of them were built for conquest and don't know how to be anything else. The process of steering a species away from a purpose it's held for thousands of years isn't clean or quick. It takes generations. It takes the kind of patience that only an effectively immortal being can bring to it. Mark is exactly the right person for this specific task because he's Viltrumite enough to have their respect and human enough to have inherited a set of values that wouldn't let him stop trying. The last issue of the series jumps forward in time, centuries ahead. Mark is ancient by human standards and still going. Eve discovered her immortality. When her body dies from injury or age, she revives young again as long as she has the will to do it. They've been together across centuries. Terra has grown into a hero in her own right, carrying the work forward into generations Mark won't live to see the end of. The Viltrumite Empire is transformed. It looks nothing like what Thrag built. It looks something like what Nolan described when he was lying, except now it's real. The final pages show Mark happy. Not triumphant, not relieved, just happy in the specific way of someone who did the long, hard, imperfect work and can look at what it became and say it was worth what it cost. He thinks about what his father said during their fight, that humans were fragile and temporary and not worth caring about. Mark has spent centuries proving otherwise, one choice at a time, in every decision between the easy path and the right one. The story's entire run is one long answer to the question Nolan asked Mark during their fight in issue 11. What are you, and what does that make you responsible for? Mark is Viltrumite. He's stronger than almost anything. He'll live for thousands of years while everyone around him ages and dies. He could, if he chose to, take the world the way his father was supposed to. The series is about every single choice he makes instead of that one. Every time he refuses to let power justify cruelty. Every time he carries the consequences of his mistakes rather than pretending they didn't happen. Like every time he accepts that being strong enough to do something doesn't make doing it right. What makes Invincible different from most superhero runs is that it takes the cost seriously without being nihilistic about it. Mark makes terrible decisions across 144 issues. He trusts Dinosaurus when he shouldn't. He leaves Earth at the wrong time. He can't stop conquest from hurting the people he loves. He gets people killed through misjudgment and naivety and the specific arrogance of someone who can take a punch and assumes that means he can take anything. The series records all of it honestly, but it also records what Mark does with those failures. He doesn't rationalize them. He doesn't become harder and colder as the series goes on in the way that a lot of darker superhero narratives use as a shortcut for depth. He becomes more honest about his own limitations. He learns slowly and painfully that being the strongest person in the room doesn't protect the people he loves from the consequences of his choices. The series trusts that honesty to carry the emotional weight rather than hiding it behind spectacle. That's what makes it work across 144 issues when most superhero stories don't sustain for a fraction of that length. What also sets the series apart is how it handles its secondary characters. Cecil, Robot, Nolan, Alan, Eve, Oliver, all of them get enough complexity that the story would be weaker without any one of them. Cecil is right about the world needing protecting and wrong about most of what that justifies. Robot is right that conventional heroism leaves preventable suffering on the table and wrong about everything he did to address that. Nolan caused enormous harm and genuinely loved the people he hurt, and the series never resolves that tension cheaply. These aren't backdrop characters, they're the argument the series is making, played out from multiple angles simultaneously. The Nolan arc is the most important through line because it's the one Mark is always living inside. Nolan told him a story about what they were. Mark believed it completely, then had to survive finding out it was a lie, then had to decide what to do with the truth. The ending is Mark having spent centuries writing a different version of that story into reality. Not the lie Nolan told, but not the brutal truth of Viltrumite history either. On something new that required him to be stronger than his genetics and his upbringing combined. He called himself Invincible, and for a while that just meant he could take a hit. By the end of the series, it means something else entirely. It means he kept going every single time, carried what that cost, and chose who to be while he was doing it. Not because it was easy, not because the right choice was always obvious, but because the alternative was becoming something his father's empire had already proven wasn't worth being. That's the story. All 144 issues of it, 15 years of Robert Kirkman and Ryan Ottley building something that had a real beginning, a real middle, and a real end. That's rarer in superhero comics than it should be. If you want the full breakdown of the show's differences from the comics, subscribe.